Hey everyone, welcome to this neXt Curve Plus Transforma Insights MWC 2024 recap. And I'm Leonard Lee, Executive Analyst at neXt Curve, and I'm joined by Matt Hatton, one of the co-founders of Transforma Insights. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well. I thoroughly enjoyed Mobile World Congress, and now I'm on the road again in a very small hotel room in Stockholm, and then I'm on the road again for 2 weeks in the States after this. So Internet of Things never sleeps.
Yeah, never a dull moment, right?
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, and so amazingly, we didn't bump into each other much the whole week. There were only a couple of occasions, right? I think there was one occasion with you and one occasion with Jim.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. Is that statistically even possible, or is that the more statistically possible outcome?
Well, 100,000 plus people. What did they say? 101,500 people registered. Anyway, I mean, how many are there? You don't know. But it felt busy. It felt like it was pretty much back to the kind of 2019 level. Now, there's nothing going on in the old FERA. So the old FERA, they used to push the 4 years from now thing out to the old FERA. So there was rather more square footage of Mobile World Congress, and as a result, everything isn't just pushed onto the one site. So maybe things are a bit denser, even though there's maybe not quite as many people there. But 100,000 plus, that's getting back there.
Yeah, well, I was busy as soon as I landed. So from that point on to Thursday, the end of Thursday, it was a packed schedule. So, very good show. Very good show.
Same for me. In fact, we had the pleasure even on Sunday night. I went down on Saturday just to make sure I was ready and raring to go Sunday. And Sunday we had our MWC IoT CEO. So 3 times 3-letter acronyms. Love that, huh? So MWC IoT CEO dinner, where we got 30 of the CEOs and heads of business units for some of the big telcos and so on, hardware vendors and all sorts came along. And frankly, it was a fantastic evening. I couldn't have been happier with that one, because we always said at Transforma Insights that we wanted to be not just watching from the sidelines and throwing flowers or throwing stones. We wanted to be immersed, and frankly, I couldn't have felt more immersed if I'd tried. As everywhere I looked, there was a top guy from, be it Vodafone or AT&T or Core or Wireless Logic or Quectel or whoever else was right there. So that was a phenomenal evening, and I met like 75% of the people I wanted to meet before I even set foot in the theater on the Monday morning. So that always helps.
That always helps, because I felt like there was way too much to digest and absorb, and I would say I only saw a fraction of the stuff that I wanted to see. But I suppose I saw most of what I wanted to see, and we had a really extensive agenda going in. I know we had things like eSIM, and we had NTN and RedCap and a whole slew of other IoT, CT type of topics that we were looking at, including all our, perennial favorites like cloud and, of course, 5G, right? So, why don't we get started here, and maybe you can, I have no idea what your takes were, which is interesting. We haven't had a chance to really compare notes, but I mean, what are some of the things that you walked away with at MWC? I'm sure there was a huge laundry list, but maybe some of the things that really surfaced up to the top of your list.
Yeah, I always have a little bit of a worry that the things that end up being my big takeaways are the things that I have decided are going to be the areas that I think are important. Because the way I treat Mobile World Congress is it's an opportunity to sit in 50 meeting rooms with 50 people and talk shop, right? And other than the sessions that I was speaking myself, I was on the 5G IoT Summit. Jim was also running a panel there on NTN. But other than that, I didn't get into any other sessions, right? It was one-to-one conversations or one to a few conversations. So the result is I tend to steer the conversations in the direction of the things that I want to talk about, and so inevitably then my conclusions that I come out of it are a little bit skewed towards that. But that notwithstanding, there's always one or two themes that emerge, and I think that the big one for me was the customer is not always right, and don't expect your customer to know what they want. Okay, that might not be what you were expecting me to say. You were expecting me to talk about 5G and NTN and all these kinds of things. But there's a tremendous focus in the IoT space at the moment on go-to-market, commercials, delivery, rather than what's the latest, greatest new technology. Right? And the companies that seem to be doing best, and I'm not going to be so gauche to name names here, as those who are doing well, those who aren't, but those companies that seem to be doing best are the ones that know when to say no to the customer. They don't get into endless rounds of customization and optimization for one particular customer, because that lack of scale completely kills you. And so the takeaway is you've got to know when to say no.
No.
That was big overarching theme number one. I should pause then and let you chuck in one or two.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good one, and it's one that I think, especially the IoT community, has struggled with because of the conventional, scaling thesis. It's all about saying yes to as many as you can so that you can quote unquote scale somehow, right? But I think you're right. I think the trick to IoT is saying no, and having enough people saying no to bad money, meaning bad business, and then maybe driving a premium for things that are really transformational. And I think maybe one of the things that has been a disservice across the board in telecoms, because it is, a lot of it has turned into a race to the bottom, and I'm including IoT in that bucket, that saying yes is all the time is probably the worst thing that you can do. There's simply certain value propositions that operators can't deliver on, don't want to deliver on, and they'll never see a profit on. And that the same goes to IoT. And I think it also plays out in private networks as well, where, I continue to hear this whole mantra about we need to make it as easy as Wi-Fi, as easy to manage and deploy as Wi-Fi. And sometimes I scratch my head wondering, is that the right answer? And is
never going to be, I'm afraid.
And I've never really thought that was a good approach. And I think in many ways, when we see how things are playing out in the private networking arena, especially with 5G, it's turning out that things like coverage and security, all these things that have been the prototypical value proposition talking points, I don't think it resonated as much. I think that they, in a similar way of what you're talking about with the whole scaling thesis for IoT, you have to start saying no.
Exactly. Well, specifically in the context of private networks, it's the don't expect your customer to know what they want. Right?
Yeah.
The argument is always the customer wants its own network, wants to own the network and have complete control of it because of reasons, right? And the reality is, if you were to put that offering side by side with what you are going to be able to do with 5G once you get standalone switched on and once you've got the network density and the quality of service kind of nailed, well, even if it involves putting a base station on site or pretty close to site, but still managed by the network operator, still as part of the cellular network, you look at what the costs of those two things are next to each other. It's going to be way cheaper to have the public network integrated version, as the acronym is, versus the standalone version.
Yeah.
Particularly if you can do local breakout and you've got dedicated capacity and all that kind of stuff. And I think in a way, actually, it's sort of nice. And I was talking to I'm in Stockholm at the moment. I was talking to one of the telcos about it today. I kind of feel like there's there's an opportunity to do the learnings about how to do the sort of industrial 5G IoT stuff once those public networks are actually capable of doing it. But you've already done the learning in the private network deployments, and that's normally not the case. We live in a supply-driven world in telco, and so we're not used to people actually knowing what they're going to do with networks before they launch them. That said, launch them is another matter. Yeah, we've had 5G networks for ages, but we haven't really, because the core networks haven't been switched on. And so once we really get 5G, I think there's already a set of learnings about how to make use of it. So it's all part of that. That's my first point, really.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of the vendors have done a pretty good job of, let's call it, compressing a standalone network footprint, core plus baseband, down into like a single rack. Saw a couple of companies that were doing that. So SA for 5G networks is available. I think the challenge here is you defeature it and you're looking at unlicensed spectrum. How differentiated is it compared to Wi-Fi, beyond maybe some coverage advantages and then arguably security? Although it behooves the 5G folks to understand that Wi-Fi is evolving very quickly as well. It's actually leveraging a lot of the technologies that we're familiar with on the cellular side that are coming to Wi-Fi itself. So again, I think it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting year for private 5G. I guess we'll see where we land, but we're pretty far off the mark from where we started off last year, where the hype, I think, really hit a high.
And the thing I keep coming back to is there are a few examples, but there are not many examples of companies that have, say, 20 distribution centers or 20 factories in Europe or the US or wherever, that have thoroughly and wholeheartedly embraced 5G, private 5G within their factories, and it's absolutely essential to their operations of those sites, factories or distribution centers or whatever they might be. There are a few examples, mining and oil rigs and a few other places where it's really done pretty well. But in those other scenarios, I don't see the companies doing other than a sort of test bed. Oh, we've tried it out in such and such a factory. We've got these little robots scuttling around the factory, delivering parts to wherever they need to be delivered. And that's fine, but it doesn't scream out a set of industries that are thoroughly embracing 5G private networks, to me.
Yeah. Well, we packed a lot into this topic of private networks. I mean, I know
Talk about some other stuff,
cellular IoT and a bunch of other things, but the other thing that was on your agenda for MWC, I mean, eSIM. I'm hearing mixed things about eSIM. What did you and Jim ferret out of that discussion at MWC this year?
That was another one that I asked everybody about, and I'm not sure I got any decent responses.
Really?
Certainly none that clarified exactly how things are going to work. I think we're still in the exploratory phase now. I took the train down to Barcelona from London, or near London, and I had a 6.5-hour journey from Paris to Barcelona as one leg of that. And I set myself the goal of putting a blank piece of paper in front of me and working out what's going to happen with this SGP32 version of eSIM, what it means. Now, technically, we understand it perfectly. The question mark is over the commercial models that might surround it. So giving the customer the ability to switch between carriers, well, great. But do they have commercial relationships with those carriers? What about all the back-end integration, APNs, and all manner of gubbins in the back end that might need resolving? That's a non-trivial issue. Who performs that function? Because somebody has to handle that process. It's very unlikely that most enterprises will really want to handle that process themselves. Right. So it becomes a managed service. And if it's a managed service, who does it? Well, does it work as a standalone offering? Can you have specialist companies that just perform that EIM function as it is? I don't think so. I don't think there's enough money in it, and we've done some sums, and we really don't think there's a lot of money in it. So it's got to be an adjunct to something else, whether that's connectivity management platform or being an MVNO or some other kind of a role. Yeah. So it's not clear to me that it's how the economics work out or the business models work out. Most obviously, it's an MVNO play. Yeah. But at the same time, you've got a lot of network operators who are thinking. Well, not only thinking, but actually saying to me, why did we do this? Yeah. Why did we decide to effectively allow all of our customers to become pretty much entirely footloose? Yeah. And I'm not sure I've got a good answer for them, given that it was a GSMA initiative. So everybody's looking very closely at it. The telcos I've been talking to here in Stockholm are very much open to it, and they're giving it a go. But there are a number of others who are a bit less enamored of it, shall we say?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like this idea of a sharing economy, right, within the telecoms industry. And this also is a dilemma that I think the Open Gateway Initiative is going to face. I mean, at the moment, they're not thinking that, or maybe some are, but they don't vocalize that this is going to be a headwind for them. But establishing that kind of shared dynamic within the industry across markets for certain types of services, or let's call it capabilities. Because eSIM is kind of a capability, right? It's you call it a market, but it really is a capability that enables certain types of services that can be built on top of that capability. But I think that's like a big dilemma. I mean, there's a lot of these open, let's call them kumbaya type of initiatives going on. I mean, Open RAN was another one. And none of these things end up going the way that people had initially imagined, right? There's all of these legacy dynamics that come into play. And I think you're looking at the same type of challenges in eSIM as well as Open Gateway with the quote unquote API economy, which, by the way, is a misnomer. It shouldn't be called that. And then with the eSIM. How you unravel that will be a trick. And I think there are going to be these aggregators, these integrators, and all these new roles that pop up. But going back to our earlier discussion around scale, I mean, a lot of these things are ending up solving very niche problems, right? And how large those markets are, I think, needs to be tested, probably will be tested. But the problem is at the moment, everyone's thinking that the pie is the whole market. But you're double counting a lot of stuff at that point. And what you really need to do is figure out what is open. What are these open initiatives, these shared economy agendas, or market agendas? What is the actual value of that versus the larger extended pie? So I think that's going to be the challenge in 2004 and 2025.
And don't expect the technology landscape to change without the commercial landscape changing, right, to try to compensate to a certain degree, right? So back to the eSIM thing. Well, if the models all change and everybody's able to shift their connectivity between carriers on a whim, well, carriers will change their pricing models, lifetime pricing. There'll be some adaptation. Now, will that completely compensate for the other? No, but it will certainly mitigate the impact. So it's a bit of a waterbed effect with a lot of these things, right? You shift one thing and then something else moves to kind of compensate, and you reach a new equilibrium. But it's not necessarily a completely radically new one. So we'll see, I guess.
You do create quite a bit of turbulence until you actually get to equilibrium.
Yeah, well, that's true. There we go.
I mean, I'm just trying to think here. If you jump on a waterbed, you're going to have quite a bit of seesaw effect before things kind of level out again.
That's where the opportunities are created, though, right?
That's true.
If everything was just steady as she goes the whole time, then there'd have to be any new opportunities. So you've got to ride a waterbed wave or something along.
There you go. That I can see a interesting graphic. That we can put into one of those generative AI, picture generators, text to picture tools. But the other thing, actually, I really didn't get to talk to too many folks about this, although I did see some sessions related to it, and it's the non-terrestrial stuff. So what are some of the things that you gleaned out of your conversations and observations?
Still yet to really be a commercial reality, but it's quite interesting to see that it's starting to mature a bit. We've seen some here I have to be a bit wary about what I've been told in confidence versus not, but a big telco, well, actually I can say who it is, right? Deutsche Telekom seems to be the one carrier that's got their act together the most in terms of coming up with a commercial proposition, maybe a little bit ahead of the proposition being in the market, but have a pricing structure and so on. And the interesting thing is this is very much being positioned as a hybrid connectivity, almost with the satellite piece being what I described as an overage, as in you've got your standard narrowband IoT offering. So effectively, for anybody who's watching, other people watching, I assume there are, or listening, non-terrestrial networks, this Release 17 NTN is basically narrowband IoT from space, right? That's the same device is essentially that. So the way they're positioning it is you've got your what is essentially a cellular connected device using a terrestrial network, but if it really needs to, it can revert to a satellite, and hence overage. So it's almost NTN, almost satellite as a value-added service on top of the regular cellular connected device, or narrowband IoT connected cellular device. So I think it's I think that's the right way to approach it, rather than try to use this to go after a dedicated cellular, because anything that absolutely needs a cellular connection has got a way to do it already. So I don't think there's a massive unmet demand for cellular only, but I think there probably is a decent opportunity associated with things that are essentially cellular connected devices, but may need some fallback or some redundancy or whatever in the next few years. So I'm quite bullish about that one.
Yeah. The conversation, the few conversations that I did have were mostly with founders and engineers who have been working actually in the industry for quite some time, the like SATCOM industry, and have been looking to address basically pioneer a lot of this stuff. Example would be like the HAPS, or Google's Project Loon. You're probably familiar with that. But in typical fashion, I end up getting into these like techno conversations with these guys, and they just lay out the lessons learned, what they learned, but then also many of the technical constraints that I think a lot of the companies that are venturing into non-terrestrial are going to realize. I guess the prevailing opinion is like, hey, look, we've been doing this for quite some time, and here are the technical challenges and limitations, the physics of that you'll have to be dealing with, and there's going to likely be in the next couple of years some let's call it rationalization of thinking that will happen. I think you're probably looking at a lot less in terms of capability than one might have thought in supporting many of the current hypothetical use cases that people are banking on. So I don't know. It's almost like I feel like this is like a broken record where each year we're dealing with a new type of hype, and the technical constraints and the actual roadmaps of what is possible just just level the conversation. But I think that's another area. But so as far as the bright spot goes, I'll talk about AI really quickly. It wasn't Gen AI. I think largely Gen AI proved that it's in early R&D stages. But there were some, I think the good news is that some good AI work, which is mostly traditional stuff, like ML and deep learning type applications and infrastructure. So, just think the whole stack. They've progressed, okay, and I think maybe they've gotten a lot less attention in the past. They're getting more now. It's now a lot of that is attributed to just all this excitement around generative AI. But the net of it is that generative AI, as far as the research that I did and the engagement I did with a lot of the demos out there, I don't want to call them solutions because they're just demos at this point, kind of proved that it's not ready. And there's fundamental technical problems that have not yet been overcome. And I think over the next couple of years, you're going to have the industry and many other industries really start to understand what the foundational limitations of this technology are. And then hopefully some best practices that are built around any kind of actual use of the technology going forward, because the level of, as much as people have been talking about generative AI, the actual level of understanding of the technology is rather low.
Although I would note my slightly trite thought on this is every year, whoever does the screen printing for the big banners that goes on everybody's stands just do a find and replace from one term to another. And this year it was find and replace sustainability with AI, right? Yeah. And in previous years it's been 5G, it's been IoT, it's been, the list goes on. Everybody feels they need that AI thing on their stand. How many conversations did I have about AI during the week? Maybe one or two, and really? I'm not even sure that they really came to an awful lot. Yeah, well, I'm happy enough about that. Well, there are all sorts of useful uses of AI in telecoms, but chatbots, is that telecom specific? Not particularly. No. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with network optimization and so on. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, but nothing I think that really for me moved the needle very much. So, but everybody's experience of these shows vary, and you more or less you get out what you put in, if you know what I mean. I come out having talked about mostly the things that I was expecting to talk about. Although one thing, just one final thing, I was expecting to talk to a lot of people about regulation. I keep banging on about this, 2020. You've got to worry about regulation, particularly around IoT, all this stuff around national sovereignty and national resilience and data sovereignty and all of these types of issues. And almost nobody raised it as a subject. One or two did. Really not very much. And I'm worried that people aren't taking it seriously enough. But that's a
Well,
I'll raise it again in 25.
yeah. Well, there was. I mean, Mark Post. He mentioned the EU's. What do they call it? The Cyber
Data Act.
Resilience Act.
Oh, okay, that one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so that's one. And I think that mirrors a similar act. Actually, I think this is a White House driven in the U.S. Right, because Biden in the latter part of last year, assigned I think it was an executive order. It may have been an executive order, not a bill, or executive order to basically have all devices of any kind, whether it's consumer or industrial, have a trusted mark placed on it, and that basically indicates to consumers as well as businesses that this is a trusted device, right?
Yeah, and you're getting all sorts of things with a kind of polarization of. I mean, I won't even mention China. There's some friction between the US and China, but you just think about the friction between the EU and the US, where the US has the Cloud Act, which requires that the hyperscalers provide data regardless of where it's being stored in the world, and you have the EU various pieces of legislation say, no, you can't do that. And just recently, you've had the EU Data Act, which creates a sort of secondary market for IoT data, and they said, wouldn't it be great if people could provide their IoT data get hold of their own IoT data and provide it to a third party to build applications on? But not if you're AWS or Microsoft, or there's a bunch of other big US companies who are not allowed to do that, right? Yeah. So there's a bunch of friction and like I said, polarization going on in the world, and nobody that I saw was really talking about, and I think that's a miss.
Yeah, maybe there's a bit of a downer fatigue, you know? You know what I'm saying?
As everybody wants really upbeat stuff. Yeah.
Like sick and tired of the hype. Maybe you're sick and tired of the just being down all the time, and then you drop into the trough of denial, and you just don't see this stuff. You don't want to talk about it anymore. You want to see the world as being unified when it may be coming apart, right? I mean, the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, is going into effect. It has a huge impact on U.S. and European tech trade relations, right? It has huge implications on everything that you just talked about, including data sovereignty issues, privacy issues, security issues, and it's not all entirely let's call it kumbaya. It's not coming together; it's actually coming apart. And interestingly, most of, like you mentioned, most of the target companies are U.S. companies with maybe even just the gratuitous addition of TikTok, so that it just looked like the EU Commission is going after the U.S. But then even with China, it was. And you said you're not going to mention China. I'll mention China. I think the attitude is very, very different amongst Chinese vendors this year, where last year they were quite open, wanting to engage and wanting to flaunt and maybe impress upon everyone the efforts and investments they've been making in trying to garner trust. This year, it's almost like, well, we don't want to talk to anybody because
I think the description of Huawei that I got secondhand this year was downbeat. I didn't see them this year, but I've spoken to people who said pretty downbeat.
I don't know if downbeat is really a good term to use, because their booth was probably just as big as last year, if not twice as crowded. There was a lot of activity. I would say that they're just, let's call it, less interested in impressing anyone outside of technology and products and the core of their business. And so that's a tonal change, I think, across the board, which is telling, I think, in a lot of ways, and it's something that I suppose we should continue, because you can't ignore them. You got to kind of understand, get a temperature check on how that's, at least that's our purview. And I'll speak for you guys as well. We're more of a global purview on technology. We're not looking at just single markets, and I think the dependencies across regions is very, very important, right? And so being ignorant of one side, I think, really blinds you to what's going on. And I think keeping everything in perspective is very important, and getting the insights across the different regions, what's happening, regardless of the geopolitics, is, I think, helpful for everybody. And certainly, I mean, I think it fortifies our research, right? If we didn't have those bits and pieces, I think we would we would be missing out on some pretty big things happening in the world of telecom tech. So, right? Well, hey, I'm going to let you go because it is very late for you, and we were going to
9:15 p.m. for me. So.
Yeah, but I will ask you one last question. What do you expect next year? I mean, this is like one of those prototypical, those typical questions that you end a podcast or webcast with. But what are you expecting next year?
I'm expecting everybody to be running around like headless chickens, having had regulation to come back and bite them in the ass. That's what I'm expecting.
Good one. Wow, was that straight off the top of your head?
It was, yeah. I hadn't really thought about that. But funny enough, right? Everybody says, okay, what's the big theme of this year versus next year? Expecting that those themes are going to be completely different year on year, and actually, it's always kind of a bit of an evolution of the same sort of things that I was talking about last year. I'm going on to talk about this year again. Now, we've got a few things that will definitely be rearing their heads over the course of the year. I mentioned regs, but there's also this SGP32 technology, which by this time next year should be just about ready to rock and roll. The NTN stuff should be more mature. I'm a bit more hopeful that some of the 5G standalone deployments might actually be resulting in some real use cases. So it's those things which are, let's face it, the things I was talking about this year as well, but they'll all be maybe a phase further on, put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think next year, I think what we're going to see is many of these shared economy, shared market concepts get challenged. And I think, a lot of these different plays are going to run into a few headwinds that make people think again, and hopefully there'll be a better rethinking of a lot of this stuff. But what I'm hoping is that there's going to be a fall back to modernization themes. I think the industry has really has taken its eye off the ball on what's really important to operators. This whole future first thing, you would think that the industry would really meditate and take a deep look at the situation that it's in and focus more on the present and how to evolve networks around the world, enable operators around the world to make that transformation. Because 5G is there, right? The technology is there. The devices, more of them are there. Probably you can argue that they're hitting critical mass, and no one's talking about it. Or at least at MWC this year, there was little talk about it. So hopefully there'll be a reset, and it'll probably happen out of necessity more than anything else. Because, maybe crypto will come back.
Maybe
be the next hype savior for the moment.
Can I give you one thing that I hope we are not talking about next year, and that is 6G. We are not even close to well, 5G in most cases has not really been properly deployed. And it's just confusing for the end users, right? Every year you get this new technology being launched, and they look at it and go, okay, should I be using this one, or should I be using the one that's already bedded in, or should I be waiting for the next one that comes up? Or, what's coming along in 12 months' time? It's just thoroughly confusing, and it actually inhibits deployments. This sort of technology, well, actually, it's deflationary, right? Deflationary economies, you put off buying something because next week it's going to be cheaper, and then a week after that it's going to be cheaper, and so people end up never buying anything.
Yeah.
In this kind of technology evolution, you end up not committing on a technology because you're worried that the next new thing is going to come along, and steady on, lads, is I guess my message.
Yeah, like I said last year, the telco industry has a tech digestion problem.
Yeah, there we go.
The Pepto-Bismol, and it's called help modernizing everything so that you can actually digest the new stuff and advance your roadmap. So anyway, hey, wonderful conversation, and I'm glad we had this chance to jump on and compare notes. And I'm looking forward to reading more of the reports that you guys put out related to the MWC 2024 and the insights that you glean from there. And Matt, I hope you get some rest because you need to go to sleep soon. You probably have a busy day tomorrow, right?
I definitely do. Check out the blog on our website. I already published one blog of my thoughts on Mobile World Congress. There's a few of the things we've talked about in this podcast, and there's a few other bits. So check that one out.
Okay, we'll provide a link below, everyone. And so thanks everyone for joining us and listening in and watching. Please subscribe to our podcast, which is featured in the NEXT Curve YouTube channel. And you can also go to the NEXT Curve and Transforma Insights website to find links to the program at www.next-curve.com and www.transformainsights.com, respectively. And we'll endeavor to continue sharing with you the essential validated insights that you need throughout the course of 2024 and beyond, and from Mobile World Congress 2024. Thank you so much.